Australia is hosting a two-day international conference dealing with the problem of modern-day piracy. Representatives from dozens of nations have gathered in Perth to try and find better methods of dealing with criminals who, in some parts of the world, are the scourge of the high seas. Well, right now, piracy is a very real risk for seafarers plying the oceans around the Horn of Africa, the Gulf of Guinea to the west of Africa, and closer to home around Southeast Asia. Well, joining me now from Perth to discuss this issue is the conference chairman, Peter Jennings. He's also the executive director of the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, and until a couple of months ago, he was the deputy secretary for strategy with the Australian Department of Defence. Peter Jennings, thanks for coming in and talking to the world.
That's my pleasure, Nick. Thanks for inviting me on.
First of all, can you just explain for us how it is that Perth came to be hosting an international conference on piracy?
Yes, it goes back to the CHOGM meeting which the government hosted in Perth at the end of last year. And at that meeting, the government announced that it was going to run a major international conference on counter-piracy strategies in Perth. This is a particularly relevant location because, of course, Perth looks out to the Indian Ocean, where increasingly piracy is a problem.
Well, how big a problem is it for Australia?
For Australia, I would describe it more as a problem for the international community. Last year, there were in the order of 400 pirate attacks recorded internationally. We see about a quarter of those taking place in the waters around Southeast Asia, and another 200 or so off the Horn of Africa. Australia has not been directly affected to a large extent yet. But all it is going to take is an Australian ship or an Australian crew to be attacked by pirates and held hostage. And this will very quickly become a very important issue for us.
When people hear the word pirate, they probably automatically get a mental picture of Long John Silver with a parrot and peg leg. In the modern context, who do we label as pirates today?
It can vary depending on the regions that you're talking about. In Southeast Asia, a lot of the modern piracy is actually structured around the stealing of ships, tugboats, and in fact literally repainting them and putting them back onto a second-hand market. Off the Horn of Africa, it's more a case of fishermen who, possibly through economic desperation, have been forced into other methods to survive. And in the Gulf of Guinea, on the other side of Africa, what we're seeing now is quite a sophisticated operation unfolding, whereby pirates are stealing oil, crude oil from tankers. So it varies from region to region.
Okay, there is a legal definition, though, of piracy. Can you explain that for us?
Well, it turns out that there are a range of complex definitions which relate to piracy and also crime at sea. If an attack takes place within the territorial waters of a country, in a strict legal sense, that's not a pirate attack, it's a crime at sea. And one of the challenges, I believe, internationally is to find an appropriate lexicon of language that all countries can use to share similar meanings about how to deal with this problem.
The activities of the so-called pirates off the coast of Somalia has probably been the highest profile examples of piracy in recent times. How big a problem is that?
It's quite significant. At the beginning of this month, some 7 ships had been captured and were being held safe at anchor by pirates. Around 200 crew were being held hostage. We've seen the numbers fluctuate up and down over the last few years, but this is a very serious threat to shipping in the region. And that does impact on Australia because ultimately we see those increased costs of ship security being passed on to the places where ships ply their trade.
What are the regional factors that give rise to piracy?
In the case of Somalia, largely a collapse of civil authority within the country, which really points to the fact that crimes at sea, generally speaking, have their origins onshore, and the collapse of the economy has forced many people who might otherwise be fishermen into a much more dangerous and illegal business.
I guess one of the things that distinguished pirates in days of yore was the support they received from sovereign states. England, for example, would often sanction acts of piracy against the ships of France and Spain, for example. Are we seeing a modern echo of that in the activities of those Somali pirates?
Well, I think what we really see is the absence of sovereign states in the case of Somalia. But what appears to be emerging, I think, is a strengthening series of links that exist between piracy and organised crime. And really, piracy needs to be seen as a subset of a range of criminal activities which take place at sea, including things like drug smuggling and people smuggling. And really, the connections between these things become increasingly murky.
I was reading that the global financial crisis is also credited with leading to a rise in piracy.
In some respects that's true, because what we have seen, particularly in the Southeast Asian context, is a reduction of the numbers of ships plying their trade at sea. And in the eastern approaches to Singapore, large numbers of ships with skeleton crews, if I can use that term, at anchor, which themselves become much more vulnerable to attacks by pirates who will board boats, steal valuables, and potentially hold members of crew to ransom. And so for a ship, one of the greatest risks is actually to cease moving. A large tanker going at speed at sea is a difficult target for pirates to attack. A ship which is at anchor, and the global financial crisis has put many ships at anchor, becomes a much more vulnerable target.